Hey everybody, welcome to Unwriting the Bible. I just finished talking with Dr. Travis West, and what a amazing, wonderful human being, follower of Christ. Just fantastic. If you don't know who Dr. Travis West is, he is a teacher, preacher, writer, speaker, and Sabbath-seeker whose deepest desire is to spread joy, defend delight, promote play, and help people reconnect with their truest selves. He serves as professor of Hebrew and Old Testament at Western Theological Seminary, where he worked to get his PhD there, working in Old Testament and biblical performance criticism. He's an ordained minister and writes and teaches about many things, most recently the embodied practice of Sabbath in his most recent book, The Sabbath Way, Making Room in Your Life for Rest, Connection, and Delight. He explores how Sabbath can become a way of living with greater presence and freedom. We talk about that some at the very end of the conversation. So I'll stop talking about the conversation and let you listen to it because, again, it is a delight. I hope you enjoy it at least half as much as I did. Welcome, Dr. Travis West, to the podcast. All right, welcome, Dr. Travis West, to Unwriting the Bible. I am so excited to talk with you about performance, the art of biblical performance.
I'm so glad to be here. It's really great to meet you, Nick.
Yeah, I just can't. I should just dive into the content, but I just can't help but just talk about how, when I was going through my doctoral work, I've heard lots of people talk about imposter syndrome, and it was just so thick for me because the content that we're talking about is not mainstream. Mm-hmm. And so when you're going doctoral level into what's not mainstream, I just, I felt like a fish out of water and like just waiting to be exposed as a fraud. Mm-hmm. And it was people like you. I mean, your dissertation outlining like when you did the history of orality studies, I was like, yes, that's what I think I'm discovering. Yeah. And it was such a breath of fresh air.
Oh, I'm so glad that I'm really glad to hear is that imposter syndrome is universal. And I have my own story with imposter syndrome, and so it's really gratifying to hear that the ways that I processed my own journey into the academy and into this subject matter, and was able to find a supervisor that believed in the project and would guide me and shepherd me through it. And he was kind of the first person that I had to convince of it because he wasn't steeped in that material. Yeah. And so but by the end of my dissertation, when he said, "You've convinced me of the legitimacy of this," that was deeply affirming and encouraging. Yeah. And your story is another layer of that encouragement for me, that and hopefully for anyone, that it's okay to be a peripheral voice on something that in fact we need voices from the periphery to help advance the discovery of the various layers of the Bible or whatever subject we're exploring. And if the only voices that ever get to talk are the voices who are repeating what's been said, right, then we won't ever grow.
Never grow. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I remember I had the best supervisor who let me run with this stuff, and he even gave me some sources that ended up being really helpful. Even though he hadn't, gone down this trail, like most Old Testament scholars, orality was Gunkel and the Scandinavian school,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
But it was during my dissertation defense. At one point, he said, so you're saying there could be multiform textual traditions that like concurrently are representing the tradition and be seen as originals. And I was like, yes, Dr. Johnson, like we've been over this. Like I thought we've been over this, man. You're on my team, right? But it's just, it's such a new way to think about the text,
right.
that it takes a while for things to really settle in.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to hear your story of how you heard about and had a desire to and engaged this peripheral discussion. How did you hear about orality, biblical performance criticism, and care about it, and to write a dissertation and publish your book on it?
It started for me when I was in seminary. So I attended Western Theological Seminary in Holland, Michigan as a Master of Divinity student. And that's now where I'm on the faculty. And after my second year of seminary, my Old Testament and Hebrew professor invited me and a few other students to join him and my other Old Testament professor in Jerusalem to learn a brand new way of teaching biblical Hebrew that was an alternative to the grammar and translation approach that was very innovative and interactive and oral-oriented, kind of mimicking the way that you learn your mother tongue, but in an accelerated way. And I was very eager to do that and absolutely loved it. And performance was a really significant, intrinsic part of the pedagogy of that class. And I really kind of took to that. And I had done a bit of theater in high school and a little bit in college. And I certainly wasn't like a theater nerd or a theater wonk or anything like that. But I dabbled in it and had enjoyed those experiences.
Yeah.
And had a kind of natural proclivity for, that kind of flourish. Or, I don't love being the center of attention, but I do enjoy the experience of a story told well.
Yeah.
And so I was really so my way in was really through learning and teaching biblical Hebrew in a way that that incorporated performance and incorporated this kind of almost theatrical element where vocab words weren't learned by just rote memorization, but we actually demonstrate the meaning of the words. We're like performing the vocabulary word in a sense in class.
So it was because I know that I think you talk about this in your book, and I've stalked you some, that like a lot of time in your Hebrew classes, you guys will perform portions of Jonah.
Yes. Yep. Portions of Jonah, and then in kind of little dialogues. So that's it's not. We do have a project that some students can take on where they internalize the whole first chapter of Jonah in Hebrew, and then they recite that at the end of the semester. And so that is a little bit more of a kind of true performance of Jonah. And I, in class, will, over the course of the semester, perform the whole book in chunks as we go. How
many times have you done that?
Oh, man, I've been teaching the class I've been teaching it since the fall of 2006. So almost 20 years.
Do you dream in Jonah sometimes?
I did early on. I definitely did early on because I would just spend hours and hours internalizing the book of Jonah.
Yeah.
So we do that, but then our students do a performance in the second semester of the Hebrew class where they each take on a different role of the binding of Isaac story in Genesis 22. And that's kind of one of their kind of capstone exegetical projects and experiences at the end of the second semester of Hebrew. And so that was kind of my initial exploration of connecting at least performative elements with the Old Testament and the language of the Old Testament and the texts, particularly the narratives of the Old Testament. And then I fell in love with teaching, and I found a lot of life in that. And so when I graduated, one other story is really important. So that same professor who invited me to go to Jerusalem and begin this process of teaching with them, this new way of teaching Hebrew, the year after we got back, so we'd been teaching this course for a year, so the second year that we were teaching it, he invited me and some other students to take a class with him where the whole class was to memorize or internalize a passage in Hebrew and put together an ensemble performance of it to present during a Friday worship service at the seminary. We have chapel every day. And so that was kind of like the culmination of things that were little threads of ideas or possibilities in the Hebrew class before we incorporated like an actual performance of the Binding of Isaac in it. As we were figuring out that curriculum, he invited me and some other students into this experience, and so we performed Jonah 1. That was kind of my first blush at internalizing the first chapter of Jonah. And that experience was revelatory. I had never heard the language of biblical performance criticism. In fact, my professor, Tom Bogart, I don't think he had ever heard of biblical performance criticism either. He sort of was very peripheral to the academy. He'd had a bad experience doing his doctoral work, and felt, he had his own story with the academy. So he basically spent his entire career investing in his students and not investing in publishing industry or in the academic conversation. But he had just kind of developed this. He's a very imaginative guy, very embodied guy, and he had just developed his own version of biblical performance criticism, literally just on his own. And so he invited us into that. And that experience of performing Jonah that semester was transformative. And the kinds of exegetical insights that we discovered in Jonah, which is a text, of course, that I had known since I was 3 years old in Sunday school, but I realized that I didn't know basically anything about it until I actually got into it and was looking at the world from the perspective of the story itself. And when the story ceased to be a text, but was like a story I held in my body. Right. And so just like the location of God and the horizontal and vertical axis on which movement takes place, Jonah's always going away from the face of God. And so there's this horizontal movement away, but then Jonah goes down, 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 down in the opening chapter, and God is saying, get up, get up, get up, join me. So that there's a vertical movement up and down, there's a horizontal movement towards and away from Nineveh. But specifically the insight that we discovered that was so transformative was, we had a person playing the character of God, because God speaks and God acts, God does things, God hurls the wind, God invites Jonah to come to Nineveh, right? The evil of Nineveh comes up before God's face. These are all like physical, geographic, blocking. It's really ancient blocking being expressed in the text, and so we had a character playing God, and we had to locate that character somewhere on the stage, either as a disembodied voice coming through the sound speaker, which would have been one option. But we didn't like that option because God is given very concrete physical actions in the story. And so we started listening to the language of the story, and we discovered that God locates God's self in Nineveh, where God's face is directly above the people of Nineveh, because their evil comes up before God's face. And this word lifnei, the preposition lifnei is literally to my face. It's a presence-oriented preposition, right?
Yeah.
And another way of translating is in my presence. And so that unlocked something for us in terms of our understanding of the story of God locating God's self in Nineveh was really the interpretive key of the whole thing. So when Jonah goes away from God's face, he's also going away from Nineveh. And in Jonah's mind, God's presence and the city of Nineveh are linked. Because God flees away from Nineveh, and the narrator keeps saying, Mi lifnei Adonai, away from the face of the Lord. And so that horizontal axis became really significant. But then also exploring this dynamic between God's located presence, God's particularity in a particular location, and God's ubiquity, God's omnipresence. Because of course the whole point of Jonah is you can't flee mi lifnei Adonai. You can't, right? It's like the narrative incarnation of Psalm 139. Like, I make my bed in the depths, you're there. If I go to the far side of the sea, you're there, right? And so exploring ways of physically demonstrating those theological realities, but also those exegetical realities that are present in the text. But as a silent reader, it would have never occurred to me to think about and ask those questions. So that experience was really transformative, and it awakened something in me that when I graduated with my MDiv and was thinking about I wanted to go on and do a PhD at some point, but I also wanted to keep teaching and stay at the seminary. I came back and I did a Master's of Theology, which is kind of a 1-year academic research degree at the seminary here. And I focused on a performative analysis of Jonah based on that experience in the class. And that was the moment when I discovered biblical performance criticism as an exegetical method. It was right after, it was during that year of study that David Rhodes, the great New Testament scholar, published a 2-part essay in the Biblical Theology Bulletin, kind of introducing the world to biblical performance criticism from the New Testament perspective. And really, I think Giles and Doan had published something on biblical performance criticism in the Old Testament, but it wasn't actually performance in terms of like internalizing a story and telling the story. It was more like performative analysis. Like kind of script analysis, or trying to tease out sources based on performative frameworks of interpretation, those kinds of things. But no one for the Old Testament that I was aware of had done like an actual theatrical performance of a story and then reflected on it. And so my THM was focused on that. And then I kind of, a few years later, turned that THM thesis into my dissertation at the Free University in Amsterdam. And so that was kind of, it was very, my entree into performance criticism was very peripheral through this one scholar who had never published anything about it, but just invented it kind of in his own mind. He and awesome. David Rhodes were kind of working on parallel tracks for the different testaments, but David Rhodes was very committed to making space within the academy for a fulsome conversation about this and trying to articulate the legitimacy of performance criticism as an exegetical method, whereas Tom was really more interested in the formational potential of performance to bring the text to life, for us to be able to access. His thing was the Old Testament is a vital spiritual resource for the church that has fallen silent. And how do we help the church recover the Old Testament as this vital spiritual resource that it is? And
you had pastors, like prominent pastors, saying, we just need to let go of the Old Testament and focus on Jesus. I mean, like literally saying that. That was crazy.
Right.
Do you know if Tom and David, were their parallel tracks, were they like critically informed going through Lord and Perry and Foley and those things, or was it more instinctual of like, hey, I think there's something that could be learned from stepping into the text? Where do you know that?
For Tom, for sure, it was pure instinct.
Wow.
It was just, he spent a semester or a year shortly after his doctoral work at Exeter in England as a kind of postdoc fellowship, and I think he taught a little bit, but mostly it was just space for him to explore more research, and he spent the whole year exploring the David and Goliath story in Samuel. And he started to kind of imagine that story unfolding kind of on the stage of his mind. And he started paying attention and noticing these very specific details that the narrator was including that seemed to function kind of like director's notes. In particular, so at the beginning of that story, in Goliath's famous speech, he defies the gods of Israel and says that, bring me a man and we will fight, and whoever wins will serve the other. Right? So that kind of the telos of that interaction that he's inviting the champion from Israel into is whoever loses will serve or be enslaved to. So this idea of service is key. And so then that connects to the actual fight between David and Goliath. David strikes him with the rock in the forehead at a velocity that allows the rock to actually embed itself in his forehead, right? So this is a high velocity. You would expect him to fall backward. But the narrator says that Goliath fell with his face arza, his face toward the earth. And that seems like a kind of inadvertent detail, insignificant detail, until you actually watch in your mind what that looks like when someone falls with their face to the earth. It's an act of prostration, right? Yeah. He is embodying his service and his worship to the God of Israel as the loser of the battle, right? Bowing down, literally. And so, which then connects to what was said earlier. But that's the
better
kind of
to
thing
bow down with a soft heart than a hard rock.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So that's like a vision. Like the point of the story is demonstrated visually in the telling of the story, and so that insight for him was significant, and that was many years ago, and he just sort of sat on it and noodled on it for a while, and then I think it was this opportunity to go to Israel, and that kind of forced him to change his relationship with biblical Hebrew from a primarily visual thing, which he learned the grammar and translation approach, where the grammar is just held in your head. It's not something that you actively work out in speech. And so I think raising the profile of spoken Hebrew for him was maybe unlocked this latent imagination around the performativity of the biblical stories and brought those two together. And I just happened to be a student at the time. And so I just got sort of folded into that. And so that was really my introduction. This absolute beloved and brilliant professor walked me into it. And then I discovered there's this very small but very meaningful and generative community of scholars who are also asking this question at a larger scale on behalf of the academy.
Yeah.
And what was most impactful to me once I started getting to know these people like David Rhodes and Peter Perry and others was their, and, Tom Boomershine, was their commitment to the church. That the purpose of the academic work is not to do academic work, is not to debate with other academicians about the finer points of history, biblical history, but rather to develop ways of engaging the biblical world that can enliven the heartbeat of the church. And performance criticism feels drenched in that kind of desire to me, because the people who have been at the leading edge of designing it have that heart. And so that was one of the things that really caught my attention, because I teach at a seminary, and I believe the purpose of the academy is to think on behalf of the church. But what performance really does is it expands that sense of thinking to remember that I, as a scholar, also have a body, and my body can help the church understand the Bible, because my body is a critical part of the of both how to access the meaning in the biblical story, but also how to communicate that meaning. That I'm not just a brain on a stick, but
even the brain on a stick. We've been so left hemisphere focused. Because that right hemisphere of the brain is so intuitive and experiential. I attended a conference, and there was a speaker, and she was saying that the left hemisphere of the brain can analyze something like 11 bits of information per second, or something like that.
Okay.
These numbers are going to be off, but the ratios will still communicate.
Yeah.
But in the right hemisphere, let's just say it was 11 bits per unit of time.
Okay.
The right side of the brain was 11 million.
Oh wow.
Per the same unit of time, because it's the experiential. I mean, it's the stuff that you go to therapy for, when you do EMDR therapy or brain spotting, or the whole the body keeps a score kind of stuff. It's the stuff that you think about that you don't know you're thinking about.
Right.
And we analyze things so intentionally and analytically, but stepping into the performance, then you become that.
Right.
Right. And how I mean, if you have a faith and you engage the scriptures that way, how could you not want that to be embodied in the church? I mean, you're being embodied in the story, But that's we've got to rethink what it means to know something.
Yes, I completely agree that I think I talk about this a little bit in my dissertation about how some of the implications of biblical performance criticism for the work of scholarship that it changes our epistemology, and even what our sources of knowing are, that we want to think that the work of pure scholarship is objective and it sort of transcends culture and time and language and whatnot.
Of course it does.
Of course it does, right? But and that's a kind of a stereotype of a previous generation. I think there's much fewer scholars today who believe that, and but still that generation of scholarship is still very influential in shaping the scholarly imagination today. And so biblical performance criticism offers a counter narrative to that, that elevates the role of experience, that the role of the body, the subjective way of knowing. That subjective is not a bad word, and it's also not like replacing objectivity as king. right?
Yeah, sure.
It's not an erasure of objectivity. There's a more relationship of equality between them. That there are ways in which we have to bracket ourselves in order to truly encounter the text. But there's also ways in which we have to bring our full selves to the text in order to be shaped by it, right?
And if you don't, who cares what the objective conclusions are?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can't have a subjective experience with the objective truth, then what's it good for?
Yeah.
Right. I'm a very linear guy.
Okay.
And I had a big fight with a good friend of mine, and I was saying all that matters is what is true. And he had read a book called In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day, about one of David's mighty men who saw a lion in a pit on a snowy day and was like, I guess he just jumped in there to kill the lion, But it was just about how story grabs us, right? The narratives grab us. And he was just talking about how story is what's really important. I was like, who cares about the story if the story's not true, or if what the story's teaching isn't true? Like, all that matters is truth. And I got mad. I don't know if he was as mad as I was. But finally, he was such a good friend I couldn't walk away from him. Finally, he helped me understand that, okay, maybe a story doesn't matter if what it's teaching isn't true. But also, truth doesn't matter if you don't have the context, the narrative context to hold it.
Yeah.
And so those have to work at the same time. And so that we can embody. What I tell my students all the time now is the Bible is not just a text to be studied, but it's a tradition of identity that's to be reproclaimed and reenacted in the community of faith.
Nice.
And so let's do that. Let's, in our biblical studies, let that be a reproclamation and a re-embodiment of who we are, not just what we know about God and ourselves and the methods of getting people out of hell and into heaven.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, okay, so we've already touched a lot on this. So let's just, I'd love to just kind of toy with something with you, okay? So what I've discovered in putting this podcast together is, and I'm doing this because when I was trying to engage this stuff, I couldn't find anything like this. Like I would look for Susan Neidich, on YouTube and find hardly anything. Ray Person, David Carr, I mean, you can find some performances from David Rhodes if you looked hard enough, Max something is a great performance of Mark, the book of Mark. Yeah. Max McLean, I think.
I think he might have been one of the original.
Oh, yeah?
Back in the 70s
he crushes it.
or 80s.
Yeah.
I think. That so name good. Sounds familiar to me. There's another guy, by the way, Jeff Barker from Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa. He and my mentor, Tom Bogart, were buddies for a long time. And Jeff is he's retired now, but he was a theater professor at Northwestern. And he would do main stage after kind of reading an essay that Tom wrote about performance in a collection published maybe in 06 or 08 or something like that. Jeff read that and they became friends and started partnering together. And Jeff would put like main stage productions at like college productions of the first one that he did was called And God Said. And it was 6 or 8 stories from the Old Testament that he blocked out and did, performance style. And he did a couple others. But then he developed what he called the Drama Ministries Ensemble. And that was like a touring troupe of college students who would internalize, 10 or 15 different Bible stories from Old and New Testament and travel around to churches on spring break. They would do tours of various parts of the country, and they would present these stories to the church. And a lot of Jeff's performances are on YouTube as well. A lot of his students' performances are on YouTube.
Jeff Barker
and the Drama Ministries Ensemble.
Okay. So here's and this, this may be lingering, linear post-Enlightenment Western stuff in my mind that I've got to get rid of, maybe, but right now I don't think so. So so like an oversimplified summary of like my methodology as I've engaged this stuff, because I came in straight through the text. I was actually reading about proof for the historicity of the synoptic tradition, okay. and a guy named Paul Eddy and Greg Boyd wrote this book, and they engaged some of this content, and they cited Havelock and Ong. I think he had gone through Foley by that time, but I don't remember if he cited Foley or not. But Honko, all these, this broad, because this orality biblical performance deal, it's a very broad, multidiscipline field,
Yep.
From field work to literary theory to performance theory. I mean, all of these things coming together, and mission work with trying to teach and talk with oral preference learners. I mean, it's a lot. There's these in different streams, and it's kind of fun. What's happening in this podcast too is bringing these streams together, and I think we can all benefit from that. And so my stream is like what is basically just reinventing or modifying the historical grammatical approach. As the way I see it now is as a first plan before launching out, or maybe as a, in the church there's prophets and there's teachers, and the teachers, now this is my framework from like Acts chapter 13, but teachers can keep the prophets from going a little too crazy. Like this is what the Lord says, he's not going to say that because he said this here, right? And then the prophets help us teachers from becoming Pharisees. Like, we can't do anything. Like, well, here's a word from the Lord today. So I think that that's what I hope my side to be, is to be kind of the teacher element, to set the performers free. And so like, for instance, at the end of Mark, the centurion says, surely this man was the word of God. Performance changes everything about that, right? He's watching this Jew die on a cross. Surely this guy was the Son of God, right? Or, oh, surely this was the Son of God.
Yeah.
So, and the performer could do it however they're feeling, right? So now, what I want to do is come in and say, hey, the way that oral traditional cultures work is they use repetition and activation. They will activate elements of the tradition. They say it with a word or phrase, and the whole thing, the whole epic, that whole content is like a hyperlink loaded into the community's collective brain, right?
Yeah.
And so in repetition, you can activate an earlier part of the performance through repetition. And so in Mark, you've got the baptism of Jesus, the heavens being torn apart, rent, and the Father saying, this is my Son, in whom I'm well pleased.
Yeah.
And then at the cross, Jesus is baptized into death. The curtain is torn in two, that separation of God and humanity. And then the centurion cites the words of God. And so, see, that's a historical grammatical approach, but it's taking into account the text as a performance to an oral traditional culture. And so now with that in mind, what's the probable way that Mark had that phrase in his mind? We can't say for certain. We don't have an audio recording, but maybe Mark wanted us to see that the testimony from the Father is now echoed on the lips of a Gentile Roman centurion as the curtain is torn in two. And so that's where I'm going. What do you think of that? What do you think of that modification of the historical grammatical approach, taking into account oral traditional orality realities that then can help us safely perform the text for this deeper embodiment?
Well, I do think that the historical grammatical approach has to be in conversation with the kind of orality and performance approach. Or maybe I should say that in the other direction. The performative orality approach has to be in conversation with the historical grammatical approach, because the historical grammatical approach is already established as one of the foundational classic historical ways of interrogating the text.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
And so I think that for the legitimacy of performance criticism, it needs to at least acknowledge that reality and interact with it, and also situate itself in light of the historical grammatical approach. And how does it help counter or temper the excesses of the historical grammatical approach, and how does it resonate, what it discovers, how does that resonate, and where does it collide, and where might it actually disagree and offer an alternative description of what happened either in history or in the text or whatever. So just in terms of what you were describing in the conversation between those two, I think that instinct is really sound and really important. And the insight into the specific insight you brought into with those two scenes in Mark and the way that they're in conversation with each other is really insightful, and also one of the things that I love about biblical performance criticism is how you alluded to this earlier, that no performance is the same. Like multiple performances are always going to be different, because even if it's the same performers doing it immediately, two sequential performances and trying to do it the same way, they'll be different. Because we're different people, and we might forget exactly the timing of how we said the line or whatever between the two, but certainly separated by time or different performers will present the story very differently. And one of the most important and most beautiful and compelling moments in my class is with respect to the Binding of Isaac performance that we do in the spring semester of Hebrew. We usually have enough students to have 2 or 3 different performances of the story. And so those groups will work in isolation from each other. And on the day of the performance, we'll go back to back to back of these 3 performances of Genesis 22. And they're all wildly different. They all make very different choices about where to locate God, how to demonstrate God, what is the relationship between God and Abraham that's communicated vocally through God's speech, and how Abraham physically responds to what God asks him to do. How do you demonstrate the presence or absence of God between God coming to Abraham and the moment at which the ram is provided, right? There's such fertile ground for interpretation, and there's I'm blanking on his name, but that famous essay by the German narrative critic on Odysseus's scar and shoot, I can't remember.
I'm thinking of Altar, but not
no, it was like before Altar. Anyway, Mimesis is the name of the book, and the opening chapter is on Odysseus' scar and Abraham and Isaac. And he talks about how he has this great line where biblical storytelling is fraught with background, because the storyteller is so sparse in the details and the emotional realities of the characters. And there's these huge gaps that persist. And biblical performance criticism is one way of exploring some of those gaps in the storytelling. And I see those gaps as invitations to explore because of the oral tradition in which they would have been filled in some sort of way by the body of the storyteller. So I'm getting a little bit afield from the question.
Real quick, I just want to interrupt real quick, because I've thought about how sparse the storytelling, or sometimes the dialogue, is in the Old Testament narratives. And I am just convinced that you didn't need to write the full thing in. I don't think we have the full tradition, you know, and there were probably traditional interpretations, you know, different interpretations of how that would have been performed, and longer versions of it that people probably just knew that were activated in whatever the text that we do have now, you know, and so we don't have all that, and so. And I think that, you know, I think that we do have, I love, if I ever have a sabbatical, I'm going to go and be one of your students. It's just, it's
welcome.
super, it'd be so fun. And I'm an introvert. And I would love to do that first semester, you know?
Yeah.
So sorry for interrupting, but you were talking about exploring those gaps, and the performance helps us explore those gaps.
Yeah, and I think one of the maybe on the ground implications of this long history of the historical grammatical approach is that, you know, that kind of evangelical Protestantism has reacted against that by wanting to kind of double down and be really clear on it looks like, are we disconnected? Hey, I don't know what happened.
I don't know if it was my end or your end. I guess it doesn't really. But, you know, every performance is different. You never know
that's right.
how things are going to.
Yeah, that's right.
So you had just said the grammatical historical approach has this long history of.
Right.
I think that was the last.
Trying to say?
We're talking about the gaps in.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So the historical grammatical approach has a long history of, well, I think it has created, there's a long history of just that approach being the dominant approach within the academy. And part of there's been an implication of that, I think, that a couple of generations ago there was this kind of more evangelical Protestant reaction against the excesses of that wanted to articulate, not only kind of elevate a spiritual reality to the text itself, but also to drill down and say, like, there is to control the meaning of the text, and to say that there is like a right way to interpret this passage, and that desire to narrow the focus of a passage down to a single meaning, I think stands in tension with what biblical performance criticism offers, because of, like I was saying earlier, how you have three performances of a text, you're going to have three very different interpretations of that text. There'll be all kinds of overlap, of course. The Venn diagram of those three performances will have a lot shared in the middle.
Sure.
But different people bring different insights, ask different questions, come to different conclusions, and present that story in very different ways. And there are a number of people who are really uncomfortable with that, and think, well, you're making the text say whatever you want it to, kind of.
Sure.
And the text says
and
this word.
That can be a danger.
And it can be a danger. Of course, it can be a danger.
But it's not. Yeah.
But there's also a danger in saying the text can only mean one thing. And
it's my thing. And it just happens to coincide and fit well with whatever cultural context I was grown in. Yeah, no, 100%. Well, and you know what? From let's just say we just go all in with the historical grammatical approach. Like, the historical grammatical approach should affirm everything you just said, because that's what we have in the text. We have the synoptic traditions, which are telling sometimes, like a lot of times, verbatim the same stories, the same tradition, but performing it in a very different performance, different orders, different lengths of the same stories. But it is that. And same thing in the Old Testament, right? I mean, Genesis through 2 Kings is the same story as 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And First and Second Chronicles tells a lot of the story through genealogy, but goodness gracious, you go to a traditional culture and you just start naming the genealogy, they aren't just hearing people's names, they're hearing their story.
Exactly. Yeah.
So like the text itself bears witness to exactly what you are saying, presenting the same tradition with a different performance with different meanings.
Yep. Right.
And so I don't think it's safe for me anymore to say there's a right way to read the Bible. Mm-hmm. I am still comfortable saying there's a wrong way to read the Bible.
Sure. There's probably multiple wrong ways to read the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there are multiple right ways to read it.
Yes.
And I don't even love the language of right and wrong. I say there are maybe faithful and less faithful, or honest and less honest, or self-aware and less self-aware. But there are certainly some wrong ways to read the Bible.
Sure.
To weaponize it in some way, or to use it to leverage your own position, or to justify abuse, or entrenched power. Those are wrong ways of reading the Bible.
Yeah.
But there are many faithful, honest, generative ways of reading the Bible.
Goodness gracious. And didn't our Lord and Savior represent that? I mean, you've heard it said, but I say to you, like the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, right? I said that right. So, Jesus did that and said that in doing so, he was fulfilling the law and the prophets, not abandoning them. But we're Travis, I'm convinced that we are afraid of losing our control.
Yes.
Which is, at the end of the day, we're back in the garden, wanting to be like God, discerning for ourselves what is good and evil. And because it's being in a relationship of trust feels a lot more dangerous than having a set box of principles that we can control. Mm-hmm. And but that's not life. Yeah. It's not love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on that topic of control, one of the most impactful and one of my favorite aspects of doing this work of performance is most of my experience and engagement with performance is in an ensemble kind of situation, as opposed to an individual storyteller. I've done a little bit of that, explored that a little bit in classes and with the network of biblical storytellers. But most of my work and kind of the perspective that I advocate for in the art of biblical performance is this ensemble experience. And part of what I love about it is that it's not just my experience and my creativity and my imagination and my conclusions interacting with the text to come up with a performance. It's like I have to make room. I have to practice hospitality as an interpreter to make room for your experience and your body and your insights and your questions and yours and yours and yours and yours. And I have to in that sense, let go of control. Because, if anyone who's done a group project, if one person has a vision and they're controlling the way that people contribute their own things, by making sure that they're as the self-appointed leader, their vision gets carried through in all the work that everybody else is doing, that's a miserable experience.
Yes, yeah, right.
And bringing a group of people together to embody a biblical text is a really great way to expose your kind of subconscious theology, right?
Yes.
The conclusions that you make or have made, but it's kind of unconsciously about who God is and who we are and how God and humans interact. Those come to the fore in just the conversation that you have about how do we play this scene. And so it's helpful to have a facilitator who's aware of that, who can help facilitate a conversation and help people to kind of come to a deeper understanding of what is happening, and then to process through that. And because when those groups and those experiences work well, what happens is that the Spirit takes of it. The Spirit does what it brings to fruition part of what the Bible is supposed to do, which is by the Spirit create a community around itself, right?
Absolutely.
That we are
100%.
united to each other and to God by the Spirit and to our spiritual ancestors, the actual characters in the Bible.
Yeah.
We become a community together by performing the story.
That's John 17, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I pray
yeah,
for these,
yeah.
and not just these, but those who hear, like that we're being one.
Yeah.
As here.
Yeah.
Travis, I know you said that around noon you needed to get off. Is that a hard stop for you? Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, I can do another question. Yep.
One more question for you, and then give you a chance to shout out about your new book and anything else.
Okay.
So here's the question, and if this, just tell me if this. Oh, I didn't know it was that question, and we can just wrap it up, okay? And any of this stuff we can just edit out.
Sure.
That's the beauty of this performance.
Yeah.
Is I can make this performance whatever I want it to be, which could be dangerous for you as well. So, okay. So here's the final question. So we know Israel was a performance culture. Like we have actually lots of interbiblical evidence of lots of different kinds of performances. The Passover meal was a nationwide reenactment of their tradition done in individual family units, right? I mean, Nehemiah 8, Ezra read the law to the people, and as I was getting ready for this interview, I was like, oh my goodness, there's also a lot of other people discussed standing alongside of Ezra, and then other named people and Levites helping the people understand. So what that mechanism is, I don't know, but there's someone reading. And same thing in Luke chapter 4, Jesus stands up in the synagogue and reads. So we know there's that kind of performance. Prophets walking around naked and baking with poop. There were lots of varied performances going on in Israel. Yeah. It was a performance culture. Yeah. We don't have that intertextual evidence of a clear ensemble, dramatic performance kind of a thing. And so I'm curious to know, oh goodness gracious, except maybe, whenever God told them to go and you stand on this mountain and you stand on that mountain and declare blessings and curses. I mean, that's pretty close to an ensemble performance, right? But like, how confident are you or are you even saying that you're confident that Israel did this sort of ensemble play type performances? Like what are you and are you not saying and all that?
It's a great question. I don't think we can say with confidence much of anything.
To be honest,
to be perfectly honest, my attempt in the book was really not to prove anything, because I just don't think proof is possible, but rather to make a compelling argument for either for this, for biblical performance criticism to be the recovery of something that was lost, or simply to be a beneficial way of engaging and accessing meaning in the text that's latent there, waiting to be discovered, but is really not discoverable by an individual silent reader alone in their office, engaging and analyzing the text. And so my supervisor and I had a number of conversations early on about this, and he was really trying to push me to say, are you making a historical argument about performance in Israel, or are you making a heuristic argument about how we can benefit from using performance in contemporary context to engage the text and discover things that are undiscoverable otherwise?
Yeah.
And my answer to those questions was both, but mostly the latter. So I try to ground the exegetical method in historical realities of what we know about and can ascertain about the people of Israel, that they were an oral culture, and what brilliant scholars like David Carr and Susan Niditch have discovered about the relationship between oral cultures and the written word when predominantly oral cultures know how to write, or at least a handful of people in that culture knows how to write, there is a dynamic relationship between the oral and the written word in that sense. And so those scholars were super helpful in helping me imagine this. And so I was trying to ground my exegetical, the exegetical method I was trying to articulate. I was trying to ground that in historical realities, but not, kind of like Psalm 131, I think it is, where, the psalmist is like, I'm not looking too high. I'm not talking about things that are too lofty for me to understand, but I'm just sort of this humble person over here that just wants to cuddle up with God like a baby and to a nursing mother. It isn't a perfect analogy, but that sense of like, I tried not to make claims that I couldn't make. Whereas, but at the same time, I was trying to make claims that I felt like I could make. And I think that there are things that we can assume to be true about that, about how the people of Israel related to their own traditions, and passed those traditions on and preserved those traditions for future generations. And so.
Hey Travis, it is on my end. I lost you for a second.
Shoot.
But I came back. But it was just a moment.
Okay.
I mean, obviously you were talking about how you weren't making the claim that they definitely did this. We know for sure. And if you don't agree with me, then you don't even understand the Bible, right?
Yeah.
But what you are saying is like, hey man, if we take this and perform this, it works.
Right.
And there are things in it that sure seem like stage direction type of things. And whether we know they did that or not, like this is a beneficial way to engage the text. It's not the only beneficial way to engage the text, but it is definitely, and for the purposes that you've talked about with biblical performance criticism as a whole, is for the church, like a meaningful way. Like, what do you hope that the church would gain from engaging these methodologies?
I hope that the church would come to realize that the Bible presents a complicated but internally coherent depiction of the character of God. And that there is not a dichotomy between the Old Testament God and the New Testament God. And that there are distinctions, of course, between the presentation of God in the Old and New Testaments, but fundamentally, the deeper you go into one specific story, the farther down you get into the root system of that story, the more you realize that the whole Bible is connected in the roots. And you've got these individual. It's like the Bible is like a forest of aspen trees. And if you know about aspen trees in Colorado, that there's this massive forest of aspen trees, thousands and probably millions of trunks of tree, but every aspen forest is a single tree, and it's all connected at the roots. And it's a single organism, whereas like maple trees and oak trees and beech trees are all like individual trees. Aspens, the whole grove is a single tree. Like scientifically, it's a single tree. And I think that's true for the Bible, that what looks on the surface like a host of independent, adjacent but not very connected things. If you bore down into the ground and go deeper and deeper and deeper, you realize it's all one, and then they're all connected. And the depiction of God is nuanced and complicated and maybe even unsatisfactory. That there are ways in which God is presented that I would prefer not to be included in the Bible, but it's all there. And somehow in the mystery of God's, in the mystery of the reality of God, it coheres, and I think that particularly when churches engage Old Testament narratives through this kind of through performance, and the opportunities that I've had to do weekend workshops with churches where we spend a Saturday engaging, talking about this and internalizing a story, and then Sunday morning those people will perform that story in the worship service, and then I'll kind of preach afterwards and have a conversation with the congregation about what they saw and how that changed their relationship with the text and all that. When I've done that, those experiences are so profound for those people, and they will not ever read those stories the same way again. Just like the first time that I enacted The Binding of Isaac when I was a student, I played Abraham, and I can still remember the moment. This was in 2008, I think. So this is 17 years ago. I can still remember the moment like it happened this morning, when we were our first rehearsal of the moment of the actual binding. When I turned, we hadn't figured it, we hadn't blocked it out. We were just trying something, just sort of go with our gut and see how the scene unfolds, and then we would reflect on it and make changes. And so I just turned and grabbed the hands of the character who was playing Isaac and started pretending to wrap twine around the hands. And as I was wrapping the twine, I looked up at Tim, was his name, but I looked up at Isaac, and he was looking at me. And that moment, I was Abraham and he was Isaac, and it broke me, and I had to stop the rehearsal. Like, I couldn't handle that moment. It was overpowering. And I think of that moment every time I read the Abraham and Isaac story. And that became a moment of deep insight for me into the existential struggle of Abraham in that story.
Which is the heart of God.
Which is the heart of God. Yeah. That's right.
As he hands over Jesus, I mean, that's so powerful.
Yeah, and that's true for every story, to varying degrees, of course. But every time you engage a story in that way, and you put your body into the story, you'll never read it the same way again.
Man, Travis, this is so good. I'm telling you, we need to do this again and just block out like 5 hours. just a 5 hour
I love
chat.
it. Let's do it.
Oh, so rich, so rich, and I learned so much too. It's you learn a lot more from a performance than you do reading a book. I don't know if you know that, but reading your dissertation, I think it's been much more embodied here. So. Yeah. Somebody should talk about that. About you.
I think we just did.
oh yeah. Well, so would you want to share, because you've got your book, The Art of Biblical Performance, which is it is basically your dissertation that you've reworked for publication.
Yep.
But then you have a new book out. Is it The Sabbath Way?
Just came out this past June. The Sabbath Way, Making Room in Your Life for Rest, Connection, and Delight is the title. And it's been a passion project of mine for the last several years. My wife and I have had a Sabbath practice since the summer of 2007 when we started doing that, and it's been there's an old Jewish saying that says, more than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews, and that is 100% accurate for us. That Sabbath has saved our marriage, it's saved our lives, it has transformed my life in more ways than I could articulate, and I tried to capture some of that in the book. And trying to capture the way, and some of the most fundamental learning that I had very recently, which coincided with writing the book, was that Sabbath is not just a practice. It's not just an isolated day of the week we set aside, and it's an add-on, disconnected from the way we go about living our lives the rest of the week. But it's also a posture that we inhabit every day of the week. Sabbath is a set of values. It's a value system that informs how we show up to our lives, and one of the ways that I tried to articulate that, many ways in the book, but one of the ways was trying to reconnect the conversation about Sabbath with delight, which Sabbath and delight never were in the same sentence when I was a kid, and Sabbath was more of an austere day of prohibitions, where you weren't allowed to do certain things. But really, I think a biblical Sabbath includes that. It includes prohibitions, but those prohibitions are in service of making space in your life for the Sabbath yes. And the Sabbath yes is to joy and delight and connection and rest and gratitude and wonder and awe and worship. And I think the Puritan Sabbath, if that language makes sense, a kind of legalistic, rigid sense of Sabbath, I think lost sight of that delight as the telos of Sabbath. And I understand delight as that experience of being fully alive and fully present in a moment. And Sabbath is our apprenticeship in living in our lives in the present tense. And that sense of presence, of being present to our life as we're living it, is the taproot of gratitude and joy. And gratitude and joy are irrespective of our circumstances. We're not grateful because good things are happening. We're grateful because that's a posture that we inhabit in the world, and that keeps us connected to compassion and love and kindness and generosity, even when we're suffering or we're in pain. And so all of this grows out of me and my wife's story. That I start the book by telling the story of my wife's struggles with chronic illness that have persisted for 22 years, that kind of exiled us from delight in many ways. And Sabbath was really our pathway back to recenter and reconnect with delight in our lives. And I think that a lot of people inhabit the delight diaspora. That we are so exiled. Maya Angelou, I get that language from Maya Angelou, the great poet. She said that we've been exiles from delight, and I just think that's really powerful language that describes a lot of our experience and delight.
Well, it's so primordially biblical. Right, because Eden means delight. Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, we're literally exiled from delight. For. Yeah. And Sabbath is, it sounds like you are saying Sabbath is an invitation and a pathway back to the garden, basically.
Yeah, in a sense. I work really hard not to present Sabbath as an idyllic kind of, the grass is always greener kind of thing, or Sabbath as a luxury or Sabbath as a privilege. And I think connecting it to the garden, recovering the garden language can kind of lend itself towards that kind of idyllic, it's nice for you that you have the space in your life to have Sabbath, but I don't. And so I truly believe, like you quoted earlier, the Sabbath is created for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath. We're not enslaved to Sabbath. Sabbath is a gift that God has given not just to humans, but to all of creation, and wove into the fabric of creation. It's inherent to being creaturely to have Sabbath as a birthright. And God longs for all of us to flourish and be in right relationship with each other and with God and the earth. And Sabbath is one of God's first order practices to help repair the breach and to reconstitute our identity as the people of God. It's why in Exodus 16, immediately following, leaving Egypt through the Red Sea, the first thing God does is institute Sabbath. And Sabbath provides the kind of the meaning-rich framework for the manna. Chapter 16 of Exodus is the manna story, but it's really a story about Sabbath institution. And Sabbath provides the framework to engender trust in the people of Israel in God as provider, because they don't know who this God is. God just brought them out of Israel, out of Egypt, but into, out of the fire into the pan, or whatever out of the pan into the fire, or whatever that metaphor is.
Yeah.
And so God brings them into a situation that cannot provide for their resources, in order to reveal God's self as the one who provides for them, and that to institute or to teach them, imbibe in them, to demonstrate to them that God is trustworthy. And the Sabbath is how God does that. And so Sabbath practice is about trust. It's about abundance as opposed to scarcity. It's about identity transformation. It's about getting perspective on our lives to be able to look at how we're living, how we're working, how we're showing up to our lives, and what values are driving that and forming us in how we show up to life. It's about getting perspective on that, and then being more intentional about showing up in a way that's more life-giving, that's more that postures us to connect with our coworkers instead of competing with them, or whatever the situation might be. I'm obviously passionate about the Sabbath, and we could do a whole nother 5-hour podcast about it. But I believe it's an incredibly relevant and resonant practice that has been almost entirely misunderstood and forgotten, or actively rejected, in part because of previous generations' misunderstanding about defining it as a day of don'ts, a day of prohibitions. And
it's funny, it became kind of another thing to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Funny.
Right, and another day in which your favorite things to do you weren't allowed to do. It was a miserable day on top of it. So I'm trying to offer a very different vision of what the Sabbath is, and how it intersects with our life in really transformative ways.
I love it. So, I'm sure it's on Amazon and everywhere in the world.
You get books, but you can go to my website, travis-west.com, and you can get links to all the different places to purchase it there, whether Audible or print or an ebook. But you also have a page of practices and sermons I've preached on it, or other kind of videos I've made, or there's like a worksheet that you can download and work through together with your family to imagine how to actually design your first Sabbath. When are you going to start? When are you going to stop? How are you going to start? How are you going to mark this transition from regular time to Sabbath time? What are you going to choose not to do? What are you going to choose to fill that space with that brings you delight and makes you feel connected as a family, or as a neighborhood, or as just as a person, or whatever?
Yeah.
And so they can download that from the website and use it. And I would encourage families to do that together, and especially with children. I think one of the reasons why Sabbath got so misunderstood is that children felt like Sabbath was imposed on them, as opposed to something that they had a voice and agency in actively creating with their parents. So if kids have a voice in shaping that day, then they'll have more buy-in, and you'll help them establish life-giving rhythms that could sustain them for the rest of their lives.
Gosh, man, And what a gift.
Yeah.
I mean, what a gift.
Yeah.
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 Well, speaking of gifts, Travis, you're a gift, man. I am so glad to know you
Yeah, me
now.
too, Nick. Thank you so much for this really generative conversation.
Oh, I just love it so much. And we'll have to do it. We have to do it again.
Yeah, let's do it.
We have to do it again.
Let's do it. I'd love that.
All right. Well, thanks again, Travis.
All right. Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. I'm not going to hang up yet. I'm just going to stop the